Every cat you've ever met is technically supposed to have died 8 times already, at least according to the legend. 9 lives. One lost every time a cat somehow cheats death. You've probably heard it your entire life. But here's the strange part. Almost nobody can explain why cats have 9 lives in the first place. And when you start looking for the answer, you don't find one story, you find 4. Ancient gods, Shakespeare, medieval witchcraft, and some genuinely strange biology. And when you connect all 4, you begin to understand why this myth has refused to die for thousands of years. Our story begins nearly 4,000 years ago in ancient Egypt. Cats weren't simply animals living alongside humans. They were connected to the divine. One of Egypt's most important feline deities was Bastet, a goddess associated with protection, the home, fertility, and childbirth. Cats became so culturally important that enormous numbers were eventually mummified and offered to the gods. And ancient writers even described an incident where a Roman visitor accidentally killed a cat, and an angry Egyptian crowd eventually killed him. But there's another Egyptian story that's much more interesting for our mystery. Every night, Egyptians believed the sun god Ra traveled through the dangerous underworld. And during this journey, Ra could take the form of a great cat and fight the serpent of chaos, Apep. Night after night, the cat defeated chaos, and every morning, the sun returned. But here's where things get interesting. Ra was connected with a group of important Egyptian gods known as the Ennead, and the Ennead contained 9 gods. 9, a sacred number, a divine cat, and a cycle of danger, disappearance, and return that happened again and again and again. But Egypt alone doesn't explain everything, because the number 9 was appearing in strange places all over the ancient world. In Norse mythology, there were 9 worlds. In ancient Greece, there were 9 muses. Christian tradition later described 9 orders of angels. And in Chinese culture, 9 became strongly associated with imperial power, longevity, and completeness. Different civilizations, different religions, different parts of the world. Yet the same number kept appearing. 9 became associated with completeness, power, and things that seemed to go beyond ordinary human limits. So when people eventually needed a number to describe an animal that appeared capable of escaping death repeatedly, 9 was already waiting for them. Now, jump forward thousands of years. England, the late 1500s. And suddenly, we find the idea written down in one of the most famous plays ever created, Romeo and Juliet. Shakespeare has Mercutio insult Tybalt by calling him the king of cats. Then he jokes about taking one of Tybalt's 9 lives. And Shakespeare doesn't explain the joke. He doesn't stop to tell the audience why cats supposedly have 9 lives. He simply assumes they already know, which tells us something important. By Shakespeare's time, the belief was already old. But somewhere between the temples of ancient Egypt and Shakespeare's stage, cats went through a much darker period. Medieval Europe. Especially black cats became increasingly entangled with superstition, magic, and witchcraft. Some people believed witches could transform themselves into cats. Others believed cats acted as familiars, supernatural companions supposedly connected to magical forces. And now imagine living in a world where you genuinely believed that. You watch a cat fall from somewhere dangerously high and walk away. You see one escape a collapsing structure, survive an accident, disappear for days, then suddenly return. Today, we'd look for a biological explanation, but hundreds of years ago, people saw something else: magic. If a cat survived something that should have killed it, perhaps it had already died. Perhaps it had simply used another life. And that's probably one reason the legend became so incredibly persistent. But there's another clue, because not every culture gives cats 9 lives. In Spain, Italy, and parts of the Arab world, cats are often said to have 7 lives instead. Same animal, same basic legend, different number. And that tells us something fascinating. Maybe this myth was never really about the number 9. Cultures simply attached the number they already considered powerful or lucky to an animal that seemed unusually difficult to kill. And that brings us to the final part of the story, because cats really are unusually good at surviving certain situations. A falling cat has something called a righting reflex. Very early in life, cats develop the ability to detect which direction is down, rotate their bodies in midair, and position their feet toward the ground. Their flexible spine allows the front and rear halves of the body to rotate with remarkable independence. Their inner ear gives them an extremely accurate sense of orientation. And together, these abilities can produce something that looks almost impossible. A cat falls, twists in midair, and lands on its feet. But it gets stranger. Veterinarians studying cats injured after falling from buildings noticed something surprising. Under certain circumstances, cats falling from greater heights sometimes survived remarkably well. Which sounds completely backwards. Shouldn't a longer fall be worse? Here's the physics. As a cat falls, it accelerates, but eventually it approaches terminal velocity. At that point, it stops accelerating significantly, and something interesting can happen. Instead of remaining rigid and bracing entirely through its legs, the cat can spread its body outward. Its legs extend, its body becomes wider, almost like a tiny parachute. This increases air resistance and may help distribute the impact across a larger part of the body. More height can also mean more time for the cat to orient itself before reaching the ground. None of this makes cats invincible. Falls can absolutely cause severe injuries or death. But to someone watching centuries ago, a cat surviving an apparently impossible fall must have looked supernatural. And suddenly, the legend begins to make sense. Ancient civilizations gave cats sacred associations. Cultures gave mysterious power to numbers like 9 and 7. Medieval superstition connected cats with magic. Writers like Shakespeare preserved the expression. And the cat's own extraordinary body kept providing people with examples that seemed to prove it. So no, your cat hasn't actually died 8 times, and there isn't some final life waiting somewhere in reserve. But trace the legend far enough back, through bards, superstition, literature, and science, and you discover something better than the myth itself. The idea that cats have 9 lives didn't survive for thousands of years because it was true. It survived because every time a cat did something that looked impossible, the story became just believable enough.